Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tobacconomics research webinar on quantifying the potential tax base of the cigarette industry in Pakistan. Thank you for taking the time out and being here. My name is Mariam Mirza, and I will be moderating today's session. If I could ask anyone who's not presenting to please mute and turn off their video, that way we can conserve bandwidth. It'll be easier for us to go forward. So today's webinar basically explained the findings and methodology behind the research done by Social Policy and Development Center. SPDC is a think tank partner of our tobacconomics team here at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This partnership is part of the project Accelerating Progress on Tobacco Taxation in Low and Middle Income Countries, which is part of the Bloomberg Initiative to Reduce Tobacco Use. Just a quick disclaimer at the start, the views that are expressed in the report and consequently the webinar cannot be attributed to, nor do they represent the views of UIC, the Institute for Health Research Policy, or Bloomberg Philanthropies. So the webinar will include a 25-minute presentation followed by a 25-minute question and answer session. So please, if you have any questions, be ready. You can send in your questions via the chat box, or you can send an email to tobacconomics@gmail.com with the subject line question and answer. I would prefer if you could send them in through the chat box. This way I can directly see them and answer your questions. But in case you miss anything, please feel free to email us also after the session. A few more housekeeping items to cover before we start presenting. First, so today's webinar is being recorded, and along with the PowerPoint presentation, both of these will be made available on the Tobacconomics website. So please note that everything, including your questions and comments, will be made public. Also, we'd love to hear from you and get your feedback about today's session. So after the session, you'll receive a link to a very brief survey to provide your feedback. We would greatly appreciate your time in helping us improve our dissemination efforts. So with no further ado, I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Wasim Saleem. Wasim is a research associate at Social Policy Development Center in Pakistan. SPDC is one of the most prominent economic policy research institutes in the country. Along with him, we also have senior researcher Muhammad Saber and managing director Muhammad Asif present for the team. Okay, so I'd like to welcome you all, and Wasim, over to you.
Thank you, Mariam. I must say that the participation rate and in time starting of webinar is, I must think that it will continue even in the post corona COVID scenario, because in live or physical appearance seminars, the participation rate and the delaying was really discourage or distort the momentum of the seminar. One other challenge is because of the different time zones and region, it's very difficult to greet everybody. Here in Pakistan, it's afternoon actually. So I welcome you all on behalf of SPDC. And I also like to thank Dr. Frank and his team at Tobacconomics on behalf of SPDC for giving us this opportunity to carrying out an interesting research on this issue. As Mariam said, that it's a topic, we are looking at the potential tax base of cigarette industry in Pakistan. So historically, annual domestic production of cigarettes in Pakistan was around 60 billion sticks, except for 2 years, 16, 17 and onward, 15, 16 and 16, 17. But historically, and now it has recovered back to this average, or we can say potential level of output in another way. On another side, the market is highly dominated by, or we can say that almost completely dominated by two largest producers, Pakistan Tobacco Company which is a, uh, which is a British American tobacco company, and Philip Morris, another way, Lexan Tobacco Company. So they captured the 95% of this market share of these of the formal or legitimate industry in the country. Most likely, other countries in Pakistan, we have two major taxes on cigarettes: federal excise duty and general sales tax, and both are collected by the central government in Pakistan. An authority, a revenue board, which is known as Federal Board of Revenue, is responsible for collecting these revenues. And secondly, um, these both these taxes, although they are applied and collected at retail and computed at retail price levels, but collected at production level, which really one of the major source, maybe a one major source for underreporting, and create an incentive to for the firms to underreport their production, because in that case they can save their in sales tax, because it's in a VAT mode, so they can able to save their input sales tax refunds by declaring higher input use, or by they can save federal or evades federal excise duty and sales tax by undeclaring their production. So, and in our country, because of integrated information system, although I must say that the current government has um, keen and taken steps to improve took steps to improve this information system sharing in Pakistan, but still a lot needs to be done. Most of the studies and other studies look at the phenomena of illicit trade, which is more wider, I must say, and look at all other issues. But we are focusing on uh, quantifying the extent of undeclared domestic production. And one challenge with estimation of illicit trade is that it's very difficult to identify, mostly based on this. I'll explain this in the review of literature, but most of the studies on illicit trade used a survey approach of by observing the empty cigarettes pack. So when you find a cigarette pack and see that it has captured or covered all the criterias, still in our country it's very difficult to find out and ensure that it is the company has paid the duty on this cigarette, although they mentioned on the pack, but it's very difficult to evaluate that is it a duty paid or not paid cigarette in the country. So given this issue, the objective of this study was to estimate the potential level of output by to cigarette industry, and to measure the extent of underreporting of the cigarette production. I'll explain that why we come up with this idea or started this research uh, in couple of slides later. Uh, and also the one challenge in, because currently our government is using voluntary and without any alternate procedure to measure the production levels of the cigarette industry or the cigarettes in the country. So it's this study gives an alternative tools and methods to estimate the quantum of tax evasion, and by estimating the underreporting by the legitimate industry. study in 2013 has uh, used this theoretical framework to shows the trade in tobacco products into legal and illegal, and illegal has further divided into undeclared imports, undeclared domestic production, and abuse of legal privileges. Um, um, but this study concentrate and focuses on only on the undeclared domestic production. But other, I must encourage other researchers from the globe can carry out studies on the remaining two in order to find the magnitude and the quantum of illegal trade in tobacco in their countries or in Pakistan as well. As I said earlier, that in literature, most of the studies has used to survey of tobacco users. They collect empty packs, observe them, and the based on their judgment, they decide that is it a particular pack of cigarette is illicit or licit. And but and none of these studies um, can be used or provide a theoretical framework for carrying out such study on underreporting of the production, because as I said earlier, that it's very difficult. Although when you're observing a particular pack of cigarette, one can say that if it satisfied or met all the criteria uh, for licit cigarette, still it's very difficult in our country to find out that the company has paid a duty on that pack or not. So there is no alternate mechanism for the government and for the revenue authorities to quantify this thing. So you since there is no um, um, methodology on or no study available on underreporting, um, um, so it's very difficult and challenging for us to develop a methodological framework for carrying out such study. So based on uh, econometric approaches available for the other sectors, particularly in economics, there is a concept of potential GDP estimation. So in that, economists use to approach use um, uh, actually three methods. One is this production function approach, where the information on the output and major inputs is needed to estimate the output of industry or a firm or even for a country. And then the second mechanism or the method is this supply function, which is based on aggregated macro level data collected from the government statistics. And then the third approach is the demand functions, where you need consumer level data for their consumer behavior. And that is a really a constraint for us to carrying out such study because of non-availability of such data system at that particular time. So we have selected two methods. One is this production function approach, and the second is the supply function approach. Uh, as it's the first of its kind study, so we want and very sensitive in that sense. So we used both approaches, and we have estimated almost 4 models just to check the robustness and the sensitivity of estimates in terms of approaches, in terms of econometric techniques. Here, reason for carrying out such study and why we start thinking about this underreporting phenomena. If you look at the data, the historical trend shows the potential or the declared output level was around um, 60 billion sticks for the country. But all of a sudden in 2015-16 and especially in 2016-17, it has fallen to 53.5 billion sticks and 34.3 billion sticks respectively. In 1 year, industry declared that their production has gone down by almost 19 billion sticks, which, and in the next year, 2016-17 and 2017-18, the production has converged towards the historical uh, output levels of 59 billion sticks, which is very close to the 60 billion sticks. So, in saying that in 1 year the production has gone down, and the next year the production has gone up, what happened that in 2015-16, due to this 15%, almost 15% reduction in the production, declared production, industry claims that in the country, because of increase in excise duty rates, the illicit trade has gone up, as it creates an incentive for the illicit producers to produce more and supply in the market because of the price differential. So they uh, claim and present their case to the tax authorities, and the tax authorities accept it because at that time no alternate estimates of illicit trade were available in the country. So tax authorities buy their argument and introduce a third tier in the system and reduce the tax rates. So what happened that in 1617, when the at we had two tiers tax structure, the total excise duty collection was 66 billion with the 34.3 billion sticks production. In 1718, although the production has recovered, but you can see that there is only 1 billion increase in the tax revenues, with an increase of almost 18 to 19 billion sticks, even more. Um, but the revenues for the government has increased by only 1 billion rupees to 67 billion. So this thing that in 1 year production has gone down, and in another year the production has recovered, but there is no increase in the tax revenues because at that time the effective excise duty has gone down significantly. So this was the one first thing. Second was, at the time when the production has gone was going down, at the at the same time the profit margins of the industry, both industries were on a rise, and went for, even for PTC, which captures almost two-thirds of the market, their profit margin went up to 51%, and then followed by 47 and 44% for the coming years. So these two peculiar trends in the production and the profit margin encourages us to look at this phenomena, that given the limitation and the constraints our tax system is facing, so look at the phenomena of underreporting and try to devise a system to monitor the production of the industry in Pakistan. So for this study, we rely on official data available in the public domain. For our models, we have used, for supply functions, we have used the data available with Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, FBR, Federal Board of Revenue, and in Pakistan Economic Survey. All these are the government official documents which provides the official uh, statistics. The second data set was developed by using the information given in the financial reports of the both firms, Pakistan Tobacco Company and Philip Morris in the country. So we have used these two data sets to develop production functions and supply functions in the country and use those models. So as I said earlier, so we have estimated these four models. The first, given their nature of the data and the frequency of the data, we have divided supply functions into two models. In one, which is more aggregated in a sense, we have used annual supply functions, and then we have used supply functions for monthly data sets. We have estimated those. The advantage of monthly data set was it captures the seasonality in the production, and it, these supply functions are relatively easy to estimate because it requires small number of variables. Um, Although I must admit that these ignores other important variables like industry's income and their cost of production, as those are not available uh, at on regular basis, particularly for fiscal years. This is one difference in both type of data sets, that government official data sets are available for fiscal years, where these industries financial statements were based on calendar years. So that was also leads to uh, challenge of not using industry's financial statement for estimation of supply functions. Then, in case of production functions, what we have done, we have constructed a time series data by ignoring the industry's specific variations. Then also we have used production function by using panel data approach, which enables us to use firm specific changes and captures firm specific input output relationships. One limitation of using financial statement data, if firm underreport their input use in their financial statements, so that will exist even in your estimations. So that and there is no alternate data available to predict or estimate the actual input use and output of the firm, even if you are not using these, except for these financial statements. So these are basically the practical frameworks for the both models, and we have used these theoretical framework, which is uh, based on firms' behavior and assumes that firms are profit maximizing, which is quite true, because in case of tobacco industry particularly, because it's not only in perfect market, but also these firms, their objective is the profit maximization. So these supply functions gives us a reason and justification to use on such analysis. So in the first case, where we have used annual production of cigarettes to estimate the supply function, we have found a nonlinear relationship between price and output, or the production of domestic production of cigarettes. I'm not going to discuss all these coefficients because of time constraint, but if anybody is interested, so I'll answer these things in detail in Q&A. Similarly, in case of monthly time series data, as I said that there may be a seasonality in the production. And interestingly, we have found a seasonality in the production of cigarettes in Pakistan. It has nothing to do with the production of raw tobacco in the country, but it has strong relationship with the budget. What result reveals that in the first or in the second part of the financial year, from January till May, firms increase their production. Um, then in June, which is usually a budget year, when government re-announce their policy regarding excise duty and sales tax in the country. So in the June and for the in June particularly, firm reduce their production significantly, and so on and so forth. And for the rest of the months, the production remains insignificant or declare has no relationship with time. So this is a front loading phenomena. We found that firms are using this because of the predictability in the tax policy in the country. Then for the firm's production function, we have used the standard microeconomic production function models, and which uses relates the output with the input use available in the financial statements of these industries. So we have used four major inputs, which includes wages and salaries of the production staff, raw material used in the production activities, fuel and electricity cost for production related activities, and the storage of the production houses or production units. Um, Similarly, then in case of financial panel data sets, same variable has used. Um, so it shows that there is a significant relationship between these inputs and output in the country. So based on what we have done, based on the historical trend of the data, and we have estimated, let me clear this thing here, that what we have done, that we have estimated the model by using the data till 2015-16, and we have predicted the values for 16 and 17 and 17 and 18 by using that model. So the results reveals that there is a significant extent of underreporting in the country, but based on the supply models. Um, Annual data reveals slightly higher uh, underreporting in 2016-17. It was around 71%, but in 17-18 it was around 23% almost. So, and these numbers were quite closer. The estimated output is quite closer and close to the historical averages production level of the firm in the country. Based on financial data sets, again, it shows a significant underreporting in the country. The results reveals that in time series it's around 27 and 22 in 2007 and 2017 and 2018 respectively. And in case of panel data, the extent of underreporting in 2017 was around almost 40%, and in 2018 it's around 21%, 21.5. Um, in as we all we have seen that in 2016-17 the domestic production um, was an outlier, which has reduced in this year. The declared output was around 34 billion sticks. So we can see that all the four models shows slightly different results in case of 16, 17 and 2017 in case of production financial data. But in case of 2018 and 2017-18, that estimated, which is quite a normal year in case of declared production. So the extent of underreporting still was around 22%, and around 22 to 25%. So this highlights that all four models gives very close results in case of 2018, but in case of 2016-17, all the four models reveals slight, although extent of underreporting was higher in 2016-17, but a slight deviation in the estimations. So all estimates based on different econometric models confirms that there is a presence of underreporting. And if you ask me that which model we prefer, so we prefer in supply functions use of monthly data as it captures the seasonality in the production, and in case of production functions, we prefer financial panel data model because it enables us to use firm specific and captures firm specific heterogeneity and firm specific variables that can determine their technology and their output levels. Um, in case of their policy implication, the study suggests and shows that there is a need there is a need for an effective monitoring system for the cigarette production in order to avoid tax evasion, and this requires an independent and objective mechanism. There it's a it's an area for the future research which needs which area is important to and maybe more efficient in order to eliminate and avoid this underreporting and tax evasion. I think this is a platform where we can learn from the international community which methods and techniques other countries are using in order to deal with this underreporting and undeclared and tax evasion by the industry in other countries. Here I'll stop. If you have any query and questions, please feel free to ask.
So we can take question and answers. I have a few questions to start with, and we are looking forward to more of your questions. So the first question came from Malik Imran, and he's asking if you have data on the percentage of domestic and MNC market shares.
So I'll answer these questions one by one, or
yeah, I think maybe we can do one by one.
Okay. Thank you for asking this important question, Imran Sahab. Unfortunately, the data on market shares of domestic production and the domestic producers and these MNCs, the only data set is available is Euromonitor, which is quite subjective. But fortunately, this year SPDC is planning to carry out a survey and looking at the market shares of different brands, which may be an objective study, because it will capture the consumption behavior and the market share of the different brands actually. But right now, except for Euromonitor, I'm not sure that any other data set is available.
FBR, what information does FBR provide?
FPR actually, in case of for they are not they not share their these industry specific information, the market share of these different industries, the producers, these taxpayers. So they are not. I'm not sure that they can give this information for to the general public.
Okay, we have a question from Kamran. So you said finding the proportion of packs bought less than minimum price is hard in surveys. So does that mean that the duty is not paid? What's your opinion?
Yes, obviously that uh, uh, if these packs, the printed price, this phenomena, interestingly, that in our country, the printed price, we found that there is a both way phenomena, that in the retail price that end consumer is paying for, even for the legitimate cigarettes, for the licit cigarettes, is higher than the printed price. And for these non-duty paid cigarettes, the printed and the market price is very very below and far less than the printed retail price on the pack. So these are obviously non-duty paid cigarettes. They are avoiding tax in that sense.
Is there another method to estimate underreporting? Could this be another method to estimate underreporting, he's asking?
Sorry,
So
could you
just
please
no,
repeat what you
if
said?
yes, if the minimum price, if a proportion of pack is bought less than minimum price during surveys, could that be another method to estimate underreporting?
Um, that is known. I think that is known as illicit trade, and I'm not sure that you will find that for a pack of cigarettes for these, let's say in our case for PTC and for Philip Morris, um, at a lower price than the printed price, because then there is no reason, if these companies are supplying or selling their um, cigarettes at low price, then there is no point to evade taxes. I think they produce output, they not declared it, not pay by evading taxes, excise duty, and sell in the market at the same price. But in case of other brands, you will find this phenomena that maybe that I don't think that we call it underreporting. We can call it illicit trade, but for underreporting, they have to be compliant with FPR and paying some taxes, and then maybe they are evading taxes. So that is the case.
Thank
For
you.
that, one more thing, just to explain it further, just one more thing,
Go ahead.
that for that, using these empty survey um, empty packs approach, we need their actually their total consumption and their declared production in that sense to capture the extent of underreporting.
Okay, thank you. So we have a question from Huyang in Vietnam. How did you estimate profit margins?
Profit margins is basically simply the um, uh, gross profits before taxes as a percentage of their net sales, which is basically the total sales minus excise duty and sales tax.
Okay, Reader John from India is asking that your estimate of illicit in 2016-17 and 2017-18 are based on the reported production values in previous years. How do you account for and capture the illicit quantities that prevailed in those years, in the years prior to 2016-17, and the extent to which it changes the actual size of the illicit market?
I think one of the limitation of using this parametric approach of supply functions and production functions that we have to use a cutoff point for estimating the output levels. We have used this 2015-16 cutoff point, so we can predict or estimate the extent of underreporting after 15-16. If we want to see this pattern for the previous year, then we have to use either an earlier cutoff point or maybe another approach, which is a non-parametric approaches like data envelopment analysis or maybe a linear programming model for estimating underreporting.
Okay, next question is from Philip Reed. It stays with the unfolding COVID crisis and potential of locust swarms impacting agricultural output within Pakistan. How do you think this will affect domestic production? Future domestic production?
In our country, what happened that in this year, the government projection for this year's GDP has shown that except for agriculture, all other sectors has shown a negative growth rate. And only the agriculture sector has shown a positive growth rate, although it's very small, but still. So I'm not sure that at this particular in time, the COVID-19 has an impact on agriculture production base, but maybe in the future, where the output, where the input supplies, primary agriculture input supplied by the industry may affected these. So maybe the production has gone down. So that will affect the production base. This is the general perception. But what we have found earlier in 2018, we carried out a study on macroeconomic impacts of tobacco use. What we have found that in our country, interestingly, the agriculture production of raw tobacco and the domestic production of cigarette has no relationship. Historically, looking at last 20 to 30 years, the production of raw tobacco was stagnant around 100 metric tons, but there is a lot of variation in the tobacco cigarette production in the country. So there is no real relationship found in raw tobacco production and these and the cigarette production in the country.
Okay. Next question is that from Yusuf. Brazil has a system whereby every time a cigarette making machine was turned on, a signal was sent to the revenue services. Is this a viable method of measuring production?
I wish we also have this kind of system here. We are facing challenge. After a lot of efforts by tobacco advocates in the country, BI partners, government is agreed to set up and install TNT system in the country, but still the independency of that system is questionable, and there is a lot of issues. But if I'm sure that that would be really helpful. Such system would be really helpful for our country. I'll try to study the Brazil experience, and I'll try that to share that with our tax authorities as well. Maybe that would be helpful for them.
So we have a question that I think we were anticipating. This is from Estelle, and she's asking about, so she says that she has a question about the choice that you've made to estimate undeclared domestic production. She understands that there are other illicit trade practices that the study cannot evaluate, for example, undeclared imports and abuse of legal privileges. Do you have a rough idea of what the latter, which is abuse of legal laws, represents? Can you identify it from financial reports?
I think it's very difficult to compute it from their financial reports, but um, we have looked in our country. There's industry actually was using earlier in 2016-17 was using that argument um, to for increase in illicit trade. And I think my team partner Mr. Sabir will um, add into it that in our country we have a area Azad Jammu and Kashmir, which is known as non-tariff area. So the industry's argument was that because of this privilege to that particular area, the industry, anybody can set up industry there and avoid taxes and supply in the market. But here the law clearly states, and we have carried out a small policy brief on it, which I hope in near future um, you all will see on Tobacconomics website, uh, that it was looking at the AJK Azad Jammu and Kashmir impact on the illicit trade. So the law clearly states that if they produce a cigarette in Azad Jammu and Kashmir territory and supply into the Pakistan, so they have to pay the duty as per existing excise duty rates in the country. So industry sell this argument without giving or without telling the complete scenario to the tax authorities at that. So identify and estimating the magnitude of abuse of legal privileges and undeclared imports, I think is quite challenging in that sense.
She also mentioned overstating the value of inputs to receive more refunds pre-VAT as an abuse of legal laws.
Um, yes, you are right in a sense that because they declared their inputs relatively higher, we have looked at this phenomena that in our by looking at two documents. One, that every year these industry in Pakistan, for their refunds on VAT, they have to declare their input and output ratios. And also in input output table prepared by Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, they have PBS has computed the input output coefficients for the tobacco industry. And what we have found that the declared and input output coefficients by the tobacco industry for their tax refunds was as very high, significantly higher as compared to input output coefficients reported by Pakistan Bureau of Statistics in the their input output tables. So yes, you are right, that may be the abuse of the legal system.
So Dr. Zahib Khan, I think he's from Khan University, he's saying that in response to Kamran's question, when you said that illicit, I'll just read out. So what he's saying that the research evidence from Pakistan suggests that a higher price of illicit products has been reported compared to licit. For example, illicit pack of Marlboro is 1.5 times higher than the licit one. Is that correct? Is that your experience?
Sorry?
So an illicit pack of Marlboro is 1.5 times higher than the licit one.
Can I
Yes.
reply this question?
Yes,
This
please
is
go ahead.
Muhammad Sabir from SPDC. You see, the phenomena you are referring is basically not just because of the difference of licit and illicit. It's the luxury product phenomena. So some of the imported cigarettes, which is not illicit in nature, they consider as luxury goods, and that's why some of these products sold on higher price compared to the legal or licit price. In fact, they didn't pay even the taxes, but there's a premium of luxury goods premium.
I also want to point out that the focus of the study was the underreporting of production from the illicit trade. So, I'm sorry, from the tobacco industry. Do you want to add something? Or should I move on to the next question?
Yes, I just want to say one thing. I was only saying to Kamran Saab's question was that it's very difficult to look at the fact that it's underreported. Either the firm has underreported its production or paid the taxes actually. And similarly, in case of Marlboro, I think this price difference is because of it's imported, or maybe the price discrimination because of the point of sale. If it's selling in those areas where the retailers can charge a higher price, I'm not sure that there is a difference in the printed retail price for both pack of cigarettes.
And if I can add to this, Mariam.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the point that Sabir was making is very pertinent, because it's kind of a luxury good. For example, if we have this Dunhill being manufactured in Pakistan, and a pack of Dunhill which is illicitly imported from somewhere else, from Europe or somewhere else, so that due to that premium thing, that will be priced higher than the locally produced same brand of cigarette.
There's a question, if you can identify other areas where more research is required.
I think, as Estelle mentioned, that on undeclared domestic imports and abuse and the quantum of abuse of legal privileges, these two, and also on that how we can improve the monitoring and independent and objective monitoring of the production systems in Pakistan. That would be really helpful for the government to estimate and compute the tax evasion by the industry in the country.
Okay, there's another question. If this is from Iftikharul Haq, think they're from Bangladesh. So the question is that if e-cigarettes and other similar products have been introduced in Pakistan, and if you think that there's significance in estimating, they would have any significance in estimating production of regular tobacco products. I think this question...
Please, Mariam.
Should I repeat the question?
No, it's fine. I just want to say that I'm not much familiar with the current policy regarding e-cigarettes in Pakistan. I'm not sure that it's available or it's allowed to supply in the market or not, or the tax policy in terms of e-cigarettes. So I think I'm not the right person to answer this question right now.
But do you think other products would have in significance on estimating production of regular tobacco products in the methodology that you've used? How does it come?
Yeah. If that information is available, then maybe we can use, I think, if the information about the raw tobacco and GLT process available, that maybe can be used to estimate the potential level of output, the amount of tobacco used by the industry in the production, that can be used. Also, the number of filters used by the industry or imported by the industry in a year, that can also be used. I'm not sure that how the information about e-cigarettes and other tobacco products can be used, because in our country the production of smokeless tobacco, for example, is production is informal, and there is almost no information on the production base is available. Also, no information regarding their no tax policy is exist for the other tobacco products in the country. So our tax policy primarily depends and dominated by regarding tax cigarettes actually.
The second last question is, how much is the share of illicit tobacco products trade, and how much does it lower tax revenue for Pakistan? How does the control tactics for tobacco products how have the control tactics for tobacco products affected tax revenue?
Although currently we have estimated the revenue impact for underreporting, which is around 37 billion rupees per annum. But in case of illicit, unfortunately, earlier we don't have any official estimates except for industries estimates available. But in recent past, other BI partners has tried to estimate the quantum of illicit trade, but still I think there is some work needs to be done on the overall magnitude of illicit trade in the country. Then once we have those numbers, then we can maybe able to estimate the um, revenue loss or the potential revenue from the industry, from overall industry, from overall tobacco industry in the country.
And just to add to this, I mean, when you say 33 billion, because if you don't know Pakistan's total, I mean, revenue figure, it's around 33%. I mean, the total FED is
Yes.
Wasim 100 billion.
100 billion. Yes.
So that means 100 is currently there, but we have lost, according to our estimates, we are losing 30 billion or 33 billion rupees.
Yes.
Just to give you this context relative.
Thank you, Asif. So the last one is Rijo. I think we didn't answer his question properly. So he's asking if you're using previous year's data to predict the year 2016, 17, and then 17 and 18. There is still illicit trade present in previous years. Then how are you controlling, when you use the previous year's data to predict the illicit in this year, it only shows the predicted trend of the reported quantities from the previous years. If the previous years also had illicit, the effect of that in the present year will not be captured in your predicted values. In other words, to the extent there was illicit in previous years, your estimate of illicit in this year will also be underestimated. Just to clarify the terms, this is underreported production.
Yes.
This official term we're using.
Yes. Riju, you are right that if there was an underreporting in before 2015-16, then what we are our assumption that in predicting that there was no underreporting at that time. But unfortunately, at that time in our country, we don't have any other sort of information available to estimate the extent of underreporting for the entire years. I think in that regard, maybe to develop a long series for underreporting in the country, we can maybe a future researcher can do.
One more thing, Wasim. basically these 2 years are the outlier years. So
Yeah.
yes, you're right. Previous year it contains some illicit trade component, but it's not very huge. So the residual are very near to mean or average. Sometimes it's a very mild fluctuations, but it's not very much. These 2 years shows the outlier, and that's why we properly reported them under reporting.
So thank you, Sabir. I think that the motive and the objective was to look at what happened in 2016, 17, and 17 and 18. But this, if we are talking about developing an alternative system to monitor the industry's output, we need a model, I think, for estimating for every year. So in that case, I think that maybe the non-parametric approach may be also very useful, because it will give us the potential output for every year from a given level of output or input use. But still, if there is an input under-reporting of input used by the industry, it would be very difficult to find out and compute the actual extent of under.
Okay, that was the last question, Rija. I hope we answered it. And I'm sorry we went a little bit over the time. We just wanted to answer all the questions. If you have any more questions or I've missed something, please feel free to send us an email. So I'll just end with, thank you for attending the webinar. Thank you to all those who participated in the question and answer session. Again, we're available over email if you have any more questions. Just to remind you, you'll receive a survey link. Please complete the survey. We plan to have more webinars in the future, and your feedback would be very helpful for us. If you're not already subscribed to the newsletter, please do so by sending us an email to be added. You could follow us on Twitter for regular updates. We're at tobacconomics.com. SPDC is at SPDC-PK, I think, if I'm not wrong. And we are also on LinkedIn and Facebook. So thank you all, and looking forward to seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Goodbye. Stay safe.